Hello. Welcome to my channel. My name is Sandra. So before we begin, a little disclaimer. Unfortunately, this time I had some troubles with my camera, so you might see a little shaking and there is some context missing, but I'll fill you in, so don't worry, everything will stay cool as always. And yeah, let's get started. So today we'll be talking about this great book called American Gods by Neil Gaiman. As usual, before the book, a few words about the author and disclaimer. So you might have heard about the recent accusations of Neil Gaiman, his sexual assaults to children, I believe, and we won't be talking about that today. We're here for the book, and as Roland Barthes said, the author is dead. So even if you are opposed to Neil after the recent events, well, it doesn't stop you from reading his books because they are worldwide acknowledged as great works. For example, The American Gods, it scored a huge number of awards, of course, amongst them the Nebula Award, the Locus Award, that's for fantasy, and the Bram Stoker Award, that's for horror. So Neil is a really multi-genre author. Neil Gaiman is a British author who writes in fantasy and horror, and as I said, a lot of other genres, but mainly fantasy and horror. So, for example, some of these other works he released before American Gods is Anansi Boys and Stardust and Neverwhere. And of course, the most famous of his works, he released it after American Gods, but nevertheless, it's Good Omens, which is famous now because of the TV series, so starring David Tennant and Michael Sheen. And if you haven't read it or watched it, just what are you doing? Go do it right now, because this is such a great example of excellent British humor. He worked it with Terry Pratchett, who is another really famous British author and director, so you should totally go watch that. Another work Neil is famous for is, of course, Coraline, which you might also know not because of the book, but because of the cartoon, which was released after. But in fact, fun fact, Neil works on Caroline at the same time he worked on American Gods, and he would write the American Gods at daytime, and then at night he would just throw a couple of sentences of Coraline. And in fact, so the work of American Gods, it took about 2 years, and he finished Coraline earlier because, well, it's a children's book. Originally it's a lot shorter, and he finished it before, and he just wasn't sure when the American Gods would be released, so he just threw Coraline and published and said, here's the book, just publish that, I don't know anything else, and they just, okay, thanks, but we'll wait for the American Gods. So the novel American Gods was released, as I said, on the edge of the century, so 1999, 2001, and the historical context here, I guess it really shown in the book, because the book is about this feeling of the oncoming storm, and the edge of the centuries, I guess people had that feeling about something drastically changing. And of course, if we're talking about the culture, so it's the rise of the movements for human rights and the acknowledgement of diversity of all sorts and identity, and of course technology, which is literally one of the biggest themes of the novel, so it starts playing a huge role because everything is changing so drastically, and we're getting new technologies and the internet, and if in the novel the television is still highly popular, and it just shows how much and how rapidly everything changed in these years. So what the book is about, on the very first page here, Neil himself gives a description, so we don't get lost in this, it has more than 700 pages, okay? So the book is about the soul of America, the idea that everyone came here from somewhere. I love the books which explore such ungrasping themes, themes that it's impossible to tell everything about it, but this is why this is such a huge book, because, well, America's a big country. this is a really deep dive into American culture. It explains a lot about the American code in general. And so Neil Gaiman, in the preface, he writes that he wrote it because he is an immigrant himself. I find it very amusing that the book about America is written by an immigrant, which also says a lot. So the idea, we'll be talking about it later after the summary as usual, but the idea that yes, everyone came there for some, that America is just a big blend of cultures, and the fact that it's written by an immigrant just blends in so smoothly. So of course the pages were added along the way, so its first release was in 2001, and then Neil published a second version of the book, which is the one I'm holding, so it has 12,000 more words, but Neil writes that this is exactly what he wants from it, and you know, this is perfect, this is the final version, and these words are really necessary to grasp the idea. And although it's a huge book, don't be afraid of it, because the pages fly, honestly. So it's written in the sort of a road trip adventure. So while I was reading, I had the vibes of, you know, like Supernatural, when they ride around in a car for 15 seasons and it's still entertaining after even when you're watching for a while, and this book as well. Another thing that keeps the reader's entertainment is this intermissions during the text. So we have the main plot about the main character Shadow, we'll talk about that, but between the main plots we have sometimes these intermissions, which are called titled Coming to America, and it describes different gods coming to America at different times. So this is like mini stories, just that are not attached to the main plot in any way, but that describe the background of the gods and help to deepen the understanding of what has happened in general. And it also prevents Neil from, you know, doing just, you know, this big info dump every time we meet someone. So this is a really, really great move as an author. And one other thing I'd like to mention before we dive into the plot is that if you are familiar with the Russian literature, if you read the poem Yevgeny Onegin by Pushkin, basically this is a novel about life in Russia in 19th century, and it is called the Encyclopedia of the Russian Life, because it describes the Russian life so greatly and so deeply, and from different angles. And I guess I could compare that to American Gods, so I could call American Gods the Encyclopedia of American Life in some way, because it also shows a lot about it. What about the main plot? So the story is about a man called Shadow Moon. So this is of course a nickname. We don't know his actual name, we never learn it through the novel, but this nickname we don't learn what it means until before the middle of the book somewhere. But basically he's called Shadow just because in the childhood he kind of stuck to adults and followed them around and didn't talk much to other kids. That says a lot about his personality, talk about later. Anyways, Shadow served a 3-year prison term, not because of a murder or anything. Shadow, he's a really chill guy. He just literally, that's all you need to know about him. So he's released early for good behavior, and he wants to come back to his wife Laura and just continue his peaceful life. But of course, tragic event, he learns that Laura died in a car accident. So instead of going home, he goes to her funeral. On the plane, he meets a mystical man called Wednesday. So yes, that's before the Netflix show was popular. And Wednesday says that he knows Shadow somehow, and he says that he wants him to be his bodyguard and follow him around on his adventures, do something. So that is basically the main plot. Wednesday, we learn, is Odin, and so Shadow is hired to be his bodyguard and follow him around to gather an army of old gods to fight against some mystical powers, and the storm isn't coming and Shadow is in the middle of it. So basically, American Gods has a huge dump of heroes. Like it has gods from all around the world, and I'm really not sure how many of them are. I mean, more than 100 maybe. I don't know. There are a lot. But the main characters I would highlight myself as well. Shadow, of course, maybe Laura. Laura is not described so well in this book, but Neil, later in his interviews, he said that, well, he would like to actually show Laura more, that he had a lot of fun with her character, and he would like to write just another book from Laura's perspective. So Shadow, Laura, and Wednesday. So Shadow Moon, about his personality, I liked him a lot because he's such a relatable character. He's just reasonable, you know. He's realistic. He doesn't ask many questions. He goes along the way. And at one of the excerpts, just Wednesday says, "Why the hell do you just do what I say and take it all so fucking calmly?" And Shadow says, "Because you're not paying me to ask questions." You know, he's very calm. I mean, he was released in prison for, you know, good behavior. So he's also not very emotional, I guess. So he, of course, is very upset when his wife dies and he grieves her deeply. But every magical event that unfolds around him, he questions it. He doesn't believe it very much. He always tries to explain it somehow reasonably, but always, in the end, of course, he comes through transformation and believes in all that. But you know, he stays really reasonable. That's what I like about him. Mr. Wednesday, another main character. Well, of course, Odin. He's both the good guy and the bad guy, and all of the characters here are really shadowy, so not particularly good. Everyone has a downside. It's hard to talk about. You know, Wednesday, he's this, you know, cunning man. You know, Odin. I mean, if you are familiar with the image of Odin, I guess it would describe him pretty well. I mean, he's wise, he's old, he's flirty with young women, he is cunning, he runs a lot of schemes. So yeah, that's what Wednesday is. So the novel itself is divided in 4 parts. So the first one is Shadow, second is Mike Ansel, third The Moment Before the Storm, and epilogue and postscript. The 2 last ones, you know, kind of one big category. So we left Shadow and Mr. Wednesday on the plane, where Shadow refuses the job offer. So he says just like, well, you're a really weird guy, I'm not going with you anywhere. So anyways, but then he learns when he arrives that his former boss, who was supposed to give him his job after he went out of prison, he also died in some mystical events. So he kind of reluctantly just says, well, yeah, okay, whatever, what do I do? Because all this time Shadow is in this sort of, you know, very depressed state because, well, Laura died and he has no meaning to go on any longer. So he goes into a pub with Wednesday, and there he meets a leprechaun, Matt Sweeney. So he goes through some sort of trial. He fights Matt Sweeney. He wins. Matt Sweeney gives him a golden coin. Coins are very important in this novel because Shadow he's an amateur magician. He does all sorts of coin tricks, magic tricks. He just goes around tossing coins in his pocket always. So after that, he goes to Laura's funeral, of course, and there his former boss's wife, Audrey, reveals that Laura was actually cheating on Shadow, and this hits Shadow really hard because the relationship they had, they were really sincere, they're really loving, and the way they interact. So we have one dialogue with them before Laura dies, and they seem really sweet. They just seem like a sort of perfect couple, you know. And even it hits Shadow more than any of the events that will happen later. And at some point he even says that, well, nothing really surprised me since I found Laura was cheating on me. At the funeral, he goes to her tomb, and he feels that he should do something, so he just throws that golden coin Matt Sweeney gave him in her tomb and goes away. And then this coin, of course, surprise, appears to be magical, and so it kind of raises Laura from the dead. So she's like a walking zombie right now. And from that point on, later that night, she goes to Shadow's room and they have a conversation where she apologizes for cheating on him and stuff. And after that, Laura is becoming his sort of bodyguard of a bodyguard. So she's always there to get him out of trouble. Anyways, after that, Wednesday and Shadow, as they are always on the road, always going somewhere, so they go to a house to meet some more gods. Wednesday tries to seal some sort of a deal with them. We don't know yet what that deal is, but we meet Chernobog, we meet sisters Zora Polnochne, Utunia, and Nochnaya, so these are Russian gods, and we meet Mr. Nancy, who is a very charming god also. Best friend of Wednesday, I guess you might say. He's described as that. Chernobog proposes a wager, so he and Shadow play a game of checkers. If Shadow wins, Chernobog joins their team. If Chernobog wins, Chernobog kills Shadow. So Shadow says, yeah, fine, sure. So again, he has nothing to lose here. So that kind of the idea behind his decisions. So the first game, Shadow loses. So now we know that Chernobog will kill Shadow. That's just his fate. But then they play a second game, and the second game, Shadow wins. So Chernobog joins their team after all. In the night, Shadow has a conversation on the roof with Zora Polnochne, who picks the moon from the sky, turns it into a silver coin, and also gives to Shadow as a protection. Shadow keeps it. Shadow tends to believe things more easily at night because of the, dreamlike state. So he tries to explain it to himself in some way during the novel, but he goes along believing all the mystical stuff that happens. So he keeps that silver coin during the end of the novel. It's always with him, always in his pocket. Here my camera went off, so I'll fill you in what happened next. So after this, next morning, Shadow and Wednesday went to a next place on their road adventure. So they went to a road attraction, the House of the Rock. What is the House of the Rock, you might ask? So this is actually a real place in America, and Neil himself said that the only thing he regrets is that he wasn't able to describe all its magnificence, because in real life it was even more unrealistic than it was in the book, or for that matter in the series which were released afterwards. The thing that the House of Rock was most famous for is the world's biggest carousel, which you couldn't ride, of course, because it's an exhibit. You cannot do that, don't touch that, just look, admire. So Shadow and Wednesday, they meet a bunch of people there, like a lot of people, and those are all reincarnations of old gods. So they ride this carousel, and it describes as sort of hallucinating, hypnotizing ride. So they blend with human forms and animal forms, and so very hypnotizing. And then they shift into this sort of another dimension. So there are a lot of dimensions in this book, and there Mr. Wednesday announces why he gathered them there. So he gathered them to create an army against the new gods. So they're the old gods. Who are the new gods? The new gods are the gods of, well, technology. So the internet, television, radio, all that sort of things. And if the old gods are called Mr. Wednesday, Mr. Nancy, Matt Sweeney, and etc., the new gods called even more mortifying. So Mr. Worlds, Mr. Town, Mr. Napkin, that sort of thing. The old gods are not excited by this idea, so they don't like Wednesday, they don't really want to do it. So it's kind of failure. And after that, in addition, Shadow is being kidnapped by the new gods. So they kidnap him in a car, they torture him, they try to get information on Wednesday, but Shadow escapes them, so he decides to work with the old gods instead of new gods. And he escapes with the help of Laura, by the way, who kills some of the Shadow's torturers, and he gets a raven from Ozin who says him to go to Cairo, Illinois. So he goes there. There he meets Mr. Ibis and Mr. Jekyll, who are, of course, the Egyptian gods of death. So they have a kind of memorial house there. They heal Shadow, and there Shadow also stumbles into Matt Sweeney again, who asks for his golden coin back because it was some kind of lucky charm he wasn't supposed to give away. But Shadow says he doesn't have it anymore, and Matt Sweeney is so upset by it that he just drinks himself to death. And so the first part, it ends with a funeral of Matt Sweeney. So the second part of the novel, Mike Ainsel, it's called so because it's Shadow's stage name. So he's being sent to this insuspicious sort of village somewhere in America. It's a very quiet town, very little town, It's described really homey, really cozy. It's so nice. And he gets there just, you know, to this sort of live undercover because, well, the new gods apparently want to kidnap him all the time. So he goes there, he pretends to be this other person, and while he's living there, he's sometimes off recruiting new gods with Wednesday. When he gets in that town, he also learns, firstly, he gets there in the winter, and he, just like Richard from my previous video, from the Secret History, he also almost freezes to death when he firstly comes there, and he's rescued by Miss Kinzelman, who is this, you know, old guy, old towner, and he also learns about the tradition in this in the city. So each winter they drive up an old truck in the center of a lake, and they wait for him to fall under the ice, and that's how they know that, well, the spring is here. So another important event that happens is that Shadow dreams of a buffalo man who says Shadow to believe everything, and that Shadow needs to sacrifice himself to save Laura, who's dead. And Shadow also dreams of thunderbones. So it's like this, you know, very weird dream. Shadow doesn't know what they mean, but then Wednesday calls him angry. He's like, "What the hell are you dreaming?" And well, this is very funny because imagine if people knew what you were dreaming and were disturbed by it. On one of the trips of Wednesday and Shadow, when they recruit old gods, new gods start to follow them, so they have to escape through the backstage, so another dimension, which will be important in the end of the novel. But while they're there, Shadow doesn't feel so great because he's human, but they meet sort of this, you know, national heroes, Native Americans, so Whiskey Jack and John Champman, and they refuse Wednesday's offer, but they tell Shadow, "Well, you're a good guy, just abandon this weird old man and go live your life." And Shadow like, "No, I have to do this." So they end up with nothing and they return back. So when Shadow returns to Lakeside, he learns that one of the girls, one of the children, went missing. He goes to a pub, so he meets Audrey. Audrey, remember, who told him that his wife was cheating on him. And Audrey recognizes him as well, and she's like, "Oh my god, so that's like that Shadow, it's not Mike Ainsel." And also, remember when Shadow escaped the new gods, Laura killed a few guys for him? So, well, these murders are claimed on Shadow. So Audrey's panicking, saying that they need to lock him up, and Shadow is in trouble, but he's rescued by the old gods who dress up as police officers and rescue him. But then they see a broadcast by the new gods where they assassinate Mr. Wednesday. What? No, I was so upset by it. I was like, oh no way, I mean, he's old and he cannot die, but the old gods say, well, yeah, he's dead and we need to bury him. And this is a devastating finish of the second part. Now we're in the third part, the moment of the storm, which, as you can guess, is the climax of the novel. So Shadow insists on keeping a vigil for Mr. Wednesday, as he promised to him. So everyone is against it. They say, well, you can't, you will die. But Shadow insists. He is hanged by a tree, so like the tree Yggdrasil from the Scandinavian mythology. And he needs to last there for 9 days. But he passes out on the 3rd. Well, he goes into some sort of a trip adventure through dimensions where he overcomes life and death trials, and there he uses his silver coin and he gives out his name and all sorts of things, and he decides not to wake up, so he's just like, oh, that's enough for me. So by the way, in that dreamlike state, he also has all sorts of revelations, one of them being that he is in fact Mr. Wednesday's kid, his son. So that's why he was so important all along, and why everybody wanted to murder him, and why Mr. Wednesday reached out to him in the beginning. So that was kind of weird, you know, just this random mortal person, and then a god keeps him as bodyguard. So yeah, I mean, basically Wednesday just hooked up with some human girl years ago, and well, here we go, Shadow. Shadow also learns that this whole affair, so the whole battle between old and new gods, it is organized by Mr. Wednesday himself and Loki as a team. So Loki is a really fun appearance here, so he's first shown as undercover driver for the new gods, and his name is Loki Lysmith. But basically he and Wednesday organized this whole battle, so the sacrifices of the gods would feed their energy so they would grow stronger, because the whole power of gods in this novel is based on belief and energy and sacrifices and cults, worships and stuff. So anyway, while Shadow is hanging, one of the new gods, he comes to pick a silver stick from the Yggdrasil tree where Shadow is, which is necessary to start this war. But on the way back, he's killed by Laura once again, and Laura takes the stick to take to the leader of the new gods herself. The leader of new gods being super surprised, so Mr. World, it's actually Loki once again. So he in a team with Wednesday, who is actually alive. Yeah. So the events here start to go really quickly. So one of the old gods goes to the goddess Easter, and Easter rides on a thunderbird, which Shadow saw in his dream. She rides to Shadow's body and she resurrects him. He's not excited to be back. He kind of wanted to die. He wanted to find his peace only, and that, but well, he's brought back to life because he needs to put an end to this battle. While that is happening, Laura arrives to Mr. World, who is Loki, but instead of giving the stick to him, she tries to kill him to also stop all the events, but Loki just laughs and like, haha, yeah, you won't do anything, and she sacrifices herself, so she ends up being dead for good. Shadow then finally arrives at the battlefield, and he announces loudly to all the new gods that this whole affair is organized by Loki and Odin, and so he puts a stop to it, and their plan is ruined. So all the gods just scatter away. And that is the end of the third part. So in the epilogue, the war is over. What's more to be explained? Well, Shadow remembers something from his dream when he was hanging on the Yggdrasil, so he comes back to Lakeside, and there he goes to the truck which is standing on the lake, and he opens it, and inside it he sees the body of the missing girl. But at that time the ice cracks and he falls under the water, and he sees that the whole lake is covered with dead bodies of children who were missing in different years, and this is terrifying. But he is saved by Mr. Hinzelman, and he is warming up at his house. But then he learns that Mr. Hinzelman is actually kobolds who sacrificed children for the prosperity of the town. So again, this, mystical life-death energy. Shadow can't have that. He won't kill Hinzelman himself because, well, he owns him his life. But then a local police chief comes around, Chad, and Chad is also aware of what is happening because he saw the bodies, and he kills Hinzelman himself. But because he's such a good guy, he's so struck with grief, he just can't move on. And then Shadow, remember, he's son of Odin, actually, so he has some power. So he uses that to wipe Chad's mind, and, well, Chad is the new head of the town, the prosperity, all good. Shadow goes away, mystery solved. So after all his ventures, Shadow just ends up riding around the world, visiting different countries, and the last time we see him in Iceland, so, well, the land where it all began, Scandinavian mythology, and there he meets Odin once again, but not that Odin, not that bad Odin, King of America and stuff, no, it's, the actual Odin, I think you could call him. He admits that the Mr. Wednesday is his alter ego, but he's not connected him to any way. And so they have a nice chat there, and Shadow gives the real Odin the eye of the other Odin, sort of kind of a gift. And then the last we see him, he's on the train, he's off to new adventures, and Odin asks him if he's going to go back to America, and Shadow says, well, yes, I am going to be back. So now you might wonder, what the hell was that all about? Well, let's talk about themes. So the first, the foremost, the most important one, of course, gods and faith in them, and America's relationship with gods in general. So the whole novel is based on the idea that these gods, they feed on some mental energy of belief of a man, and that's why the gods find it so difficult to live in America, because America is a land of immigrants, so everyone came here from somewhere. So there is this pots of all sorts of gods all around the world, but they are starving there because the people are also immigrants, and they become someone new there, and they lose their traditions, and they just melt it into one huge candle, and it's why the gods find it so hard to stay there and to stabilize there. That of course shows very well through their names, because like as I said, Anansi becomes Mr. Nancy, Odin becomes Wednesday, and the new gods are just pathetic. I mean, what is the world television napkins? And the whole idea about the new gods, so people in new world make this new ideals for themselves, worship, commercialism, if you will, and create the gods from some objects. Speaking of the old gods, the moments when they ride on the carousel is actually very symbolic. The movement of the carousel describes very well, you know, this up and downs, faith and falls. And in general, the novel just gives the idea that the gods are manifestations, and they are created by humans, and they are created by humans to make sense of the world, and that the humans need gods just as much as the gods need them to exist. Another evident topic is, of course, old versus new. So we have old gods, and the old gods might come off as not really likable personas, you know, because Wednesday's cunning, Loki is lying to everyone, I mean, Matt Sweeney is drunk and boisterous all the time, but at the same time, there's something so appealing to them. Like, you know, you could recognize in some of the more appealing ones, you could recognize just, that's like, just like my grandpa, or my dad, and something very relatable and personal and so dear about them. And while the new gods, well, they are fancy, but they have no personality. I mean, at least just yet. Perhaps it could be attributed to the fact that they're just beginning their journey and that they are basically children compared to the old gods. But I mean, there's a technology boy, and I mean, technology boy, well, I remembered about him that he was a brat and he wanted McDonald's, and that's all there is to him. So new gods might be more fancy and technical, and their means, by the way, are more straightforward, so they more often use violence than the old gods, who prefer some cunning ways. As I said, there is not a certain side, I mean, at least to me, because both have downsides and benefits and disadvantages. I mean, the new gods feed off people's attention just as old gods feed off their sacrifices. So the conflict of the old and new world is one of the biggest themes of the whole novel. Next theme is appearance and reality, because, well, obviously, the whole novel is about that everything here is not what it seems to be. And it can be seen in lots and lots of episodes I've told before. So from the very beginning, when Wednesday and Shadow commit bank heist, so Wednesday pretends to be this old, weak man, and then numerously he pretends to be a police officer, and the old gods, when they rescue Shadow, they also pretending. A lot of events happen in a dreamlike state also, so as I mentioned, Zra Polnochная gives Shadow a silver coin at night. Laura comes to him almost always at night, and he's healed at Mr. Jekyll and Ibis also at night. So the night is being a symbol of this magical state where everything is possible. But of course, the most devastating play of appearance here is the transformation of Mr. Hinzelman, who we thought to be this, really great, really friendly, nice, lovely guy who just wants to help everyone, and who's like a grandpa, something like that. And then he turns out to be this kobold-possessed serial killer who drives kids in the truck and drops them dead in the down of the lake. I mean, that was horrifying. I mean, that is where the Bram Stoker award comes from. And of course, as you might have noticed, coins play a huge role in this novel. So the first coin Shadow gets in the beginning from Matt Sweeney, it actually has a much larger power than we might have thought. So first it resurrects Laura from the dead, and then it turns out to be such a huge thing that Matt Sweeney dies because he lost it. And then the silver coin, Zora Polnochная, turns Moon into, and it serves as lucky charm, protecting Shadow from all the bad things. And then in the end, when he's going through his life trials, he also gives it to complete his mission of a vigil. And then of course Shadow himself, being this amateur magician, always with a coin, always with magic tricks, and I mean, him being the son of Odin, maybe that's something that runs in family. And so coins serve as this symbol of bargains and power which lies beneath them, and that every deal has a downside which is more meaningful than it seems at first. And the last topic, as usual one of my favorites, is the sacredness of the land, and also the symbolism of the roads. So the land, as it often comes in America, so for example we remember Gone with the Wind, which of course also shows the sacredness of it. It's highly important to everyone, perhaps even more important than these gods themselves, because Neil Gaiman shows that divine can be found anywhere and that the land holds its own mental power. For example, in the novel there are places where the gods literally cannot be physically because they're drained from power there, which shows the energy of the land itself. Roads serve as a huge symbol here, as a metaphorical figure, of course, for the characters' explorations of the story and of themselves. So we're always on the roads, we're always going somewhere, and Shadow, for example, he goes from being a passive observer to an active participant who changes the events drastically. And so the idea is that you can find any answer if you're willing to go far enough. And then of course again, roads symbolize this cultural blend that happens in America. So as the roads crisscross each other, so the cultures also blend and influence each other, and all the small towns and the roadside attractions that Shadow and Wednesday see along the way, they all unique, they all have their traditions and myths that came here from somewhere, and it all blends into this, great twist. And of course it shows very well the diversity of America, how it's different in one part than in the other. And to finish it with a quote, so I have a few favorites of course, but about the sacredness of land. So, it's almost hard to believe that this is in the same country as Lakeside, he said, once they glared at him. Then he said, it's not. San Francisco isn't in the same country as Lakeside any more than New Orleans is in the same country as New York, or Miami is in the same country as Minneapolis. Well, we're through with the themes, and to say a few words about what happened to the book after its huge success, well, of course it's got its own TV series, released in 2017. It has 3 seasons, it is finished, it covers the whole story from the beginning to the end, and unlike most movie adaptation, it doesn't cut the story but actually adds to it. So Neil himself, in the interview, he said that there are some scenes that he wished he would write in the book, so I highly recommend you to watch it. There is a lot more to say about this book. I mean, look how huge it is. If you're interested in American culture or you just love a good fantasy story, either way, you should read it. You won't be disappointed, I promise. It is very captivating and entrapping. And I'll be delighted to discuss it with you in the comments. So tell me what you think, if you have read it, if you watched this series, which side are you on, old gods or new ones, and who is your favorite? For now, I'll be seeing you next time with a new great book. Bye bye! So basically, the whole novel is divided in 4 parts. The first one called Shadow, second Mike Ainsel, third The Moment Before the Storm, and the epilogue. Wait, that's 5. The second part of the novel is called Mike Ainsel, and it's called so because it is Shadow's stage man. Shadow's what? Okay.